Arjun had always believed that life was fair, that if he worked hard enough, things would inevitably turn out well. Since he was a boy, that belief lived quietly inside him, like a small flame that never quite went out. He grew up in a sleepy town where the sun rose earlier than anywhere else, and everyone he knew seemed trapped in a cycle of early mornings, long days, and the same tired evenings. His father worked the market stalls, his mother sewed garments in their tiny home, and his own days were filled with doing everything and nothing at the same time. They worked, but they never progressed. Every month felt like a repeat of the last, like a loop that had no escape. And so, as Arjun grew older, he began to wonder if hard work alone was enough, or if there was something deeper, something invisible that successful people knew, but no one had ever told him. One winter morning, as the first pale light touched the rooftops, Arjun walked down the old stone path toward the dried riverbed on the edge of town. His mind was heavy with questions he had no answers to. Everyone around him seemed pinned in place by routine, yet somewhere out beyond his view, he felt that life was happening differently. In that moment of quiet, he made a choice. He would seek answers no matter how uncomfortable or uncertain the path ahead might be. He didn't know how long the journey would take or where it would lead, but for the first time he felt he had to try. The first weeks were the hardest. Arjun woke before the sun each day, not to labor, but to think. He sat on the riverbank and watched the sky shift from black to silver to gold. At first his mind wandered, doubt, distractions, familiar fears that told him to return to sleep, but gradually something changed. In the stillness before sunrise, when the world had not yet begun its noise, Arjun felt his thoughts clear. He began journaling, writing down his fears, his goals, the things that made his heart beat a little faster. And with every sunrise, he felt a shift that was small enough not to be noticed by others, but profound enough that he could feel it in his bones. People in the town noticed Arjun walking out before dawn and whispered among themselves. "Why leave sleep for cold air?" they asked. Some laughed, some shook their heads, and some were quietly intrigued. But Arjun didn't speak of his mornings, he simply continued. He read books borrowed from travelers, listened to teachers passing through, and wrote letters to friends he hadn't seen in years, asking them about their own journeys, their own struggles, and how they found meaning in their work. With each answer he received, Arjun stitched together fragments of wisdom that felt bigger than any single idea, and these pieces slowly became a map for his life's direction. By the time spring arrived, his routine had transformed his days. The town saw a change in him too, not dramatic, but unmistakable. His posture was straighter, his eyes steadier, and his voice carried a calm clarity that drew others in. People began to ask him simple questions. How do you stay so calm? Why do you wake up so early? What are you chasing that you haven't told us yet? And while some questions he couldn't answer fully, others he shared honestly. That his mornings were not about productivity alone, but about understanding who he wanted to become. One afternoon, a teacher from the city visited the town and stopped to speak with Arjun. She spoke of her own challenges, schools that failed students, bureaucracies that crushed dreams, and people who surrendered before they ever truly tried. Arjun listened, and then shared his sunrise journal, the thoughts he had recorded, the questions that once haunted him, and how simply choosing to wake up before his fears each day changed him. The teacher was struck not by the words themselves, but by the sincerity behind them. She told him that true growth was not measured by how quickly one succeeded, but by how willingly one faced uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that forces you to look deeper within yourself. Months passed and Arjun's life began to take on shape. He started a small gathering in the evenings where townspeople would meet to discuss ideas they had once been too afraid to voice. Some came out of curiosity, others out of hope. They talked about dreams that felt too big, goals that felt too fragile, and the courage it took just to say them aloud. And in those conversations, Arjun saw something he had never seen before, that the seed of motivation planted inside him had now begun to grow in others too. There were setbacks. There were days when old doubts crept in, mornings when Arjun's body pleaded for sleep, or evenings when he failed to write anything meaningful. But he learned that struggle was not a sign of weakness, but a sign that he was pushing boundaries he hadn't pushed before. Even when progress felt invisible, He continued to show up, not for the applause, but for the quiet fulfillment he felt in simply being committed to his path. Then one day, a stranger came to town. Someone who recognized Arjun's story, not because it was remarkable, but because it was universal. The stranger spoke of potential that lives in every person, of how the greatest battles are often fought within one's own mind, and of how the choice to keep going, even when it feels pointless, is what separates those who hope from those who achieve. The room fell silent as he spoke, and when he finished, a wave of realization passed through the listeners. They saw in themselves the same longing Arjun had once felt, for purpose, for clarity, for a life worth living. Years later, people would remember Arjun not for wealth, fame, or grand achievements, but for something more subtle and enduring, the courage to start. He had started with nothing more than a quiet resolve, an early morning, a blank journal, and a heart that refused to settle for a life that felt incomplete. The town changed too. The cycle of monotony gradually gave way to cycles of learning, growth, and shared ambition. People still woke before sunrise, but now they walked out with intention, not just to greet another day, but to define what that day meant to them. And so Arjun's story was not one of perfection or instant transformation. It was a story about the choice to rise when others sleep, to think when others react, and to believe when others doubt. In that choice, he found not only his own path, but a way of inspiring others to look deeper, to ask harder questions, and to pursue lives that felt more alive than they ever thought possible. And that, more than anything, was the true measure of success.